Good afternoon if you're in this part of the world, or good morning if you're out there in God's country on the West Coast. I'm Gary Hall, the Dean of Washington National Cathedral, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you today to this conversation among friends about the Cathedral's mission and ministry, both now and as we move forward. I've been the Dean of the Cathedral now for just about 3 years, and in my time here, it's become really apparent to me that Washington National Cathedral stands in the center of a number of tensions. We are a national institution, the place where our nation comes to celebrate and to pray and to mourn in important moments of our national life. We are a local institution, the Cathedral for the Diocese of Washington, and a large institution and faith community in the District of Columbia. We are a national treasure and an historic site. We are also a dynamic, programmatic, and missional institution. Washington National Cathedral, like many institutions of our size and reach, is many things to many people. And when we gather and think about the mission, ministry, and future of this wonderful place, we do so understanding that it means many things to many people, and that part of our calling as both the nation's church and as the Cathedral of Washington is to try to embody as much as we can of our shared mission and ministry together. We're going to be asking people to share personal reflections today, and my own personal reflection has to do with my time here and one of the ways I spend it every day. I try to make a practice almost every day, and I've been pretty successful at it, at taking a break from the endless round of meetings that my life is, and going all the way west to the west end of the nave and saying hello to the docents. We have a wonderful group of docents who, we have different teams every day of the week. We have a wonderful group of volunteer docents who are the ambassadors for the cathedral and welcome people into its life and teach them about not only the building, but about the history and the tradition behind it. And as I do that, I can't help but notice the effect that the building has upon people. When people enter the building, they almost reflexively do something reverent. They either go and light a candle up in the front chapels, or they stop and sit and say a prayer, or they kneel down, or they do something to give expression to the awe that they feel in this great Gothic transcendent space. And so I would say, as we gather today, that we're not just a pretty face. We have a lot else going on in our life than being just a beautiful Gothic building with beautiful accoutrements. But that pretty face empowers us and enables us to be so much more. So as we gather together today, I want us to think about the importance of this building, not only for the authority it gives us to convene conversations, but the power of this building to transform people's lives spiritually and to introduce them to the gospel, which fundamentally is why we gather as a Christian community in the first place. There are many faithful people who have been involved in the life of the Washington National Cathedral, but one of the most important and faithful groups of all is the National Cathedral Association, which for many decades has represented all of our nation's communities in not only the building, but in the maintaining and strengthening of this cathedral, and as conversation partners. And now it's my pleasure to turn the podium over to its chair, John Shenefield.
Good afternoon, everybody, and a good morning to the people to whom Dean Hall alluded, and a happy 108th birthday to our great cathedral. Yes. I am John Shenefield, and as the Dean says, I have the honor of being chair of the NCA. Now, I can just anticipate that some of you are sitting out there saying, what in the heck is the NCA? Let me tell you briefly. The National Cathedral Association, it's a nationwide association of friends and supporters of the Washington National Cathedral. It has a long and proud history, which I'll tell you about in a moment. Today and going forward, it continues to have the critical mission to respond to the needs of the cathedral and to support and enhance the cathedral's ministry. A brief word about the history, because it's really quite fascinating. The origins of the NCA can be traced back to the earliest meetings of various support committees across the country, beginning as early as 1898, 7 years before the setting of the foundation stone on September 29, 1907. Those committee meetings were convened to provide encouragement and moral support, yes, but more tangibly, much needed funds to procure, protect, and develop the land on Mount St. Albans that we all now know as the Cathedral Close. Over the years, the numbers increased greatly. Committees proliferated across the country. Incorporation came in 1933, and all the while, the NCA was helping to build this cathedral. For example, the Pilgrim Observation Gallery all around us, the NCA Bay on the north outer aisle of the nave downstairs, the NCA Flying Buttress in the apse, and importantly, the great pinnacle of the Southwest Tower given by the NCA, whose finial was the final stone of the cathedral set on September 29, 1990, 83 years to the day after the setting of the foundation stone. In the years after the setting, the NCA membership reached somewhere approximately 30,000. But the excitement of the completion of the cathedral passed, and the number predictably declined. But now, today, a primary NCA objective is growth, expansion, all in support of the cathedral. The Cathedral Development Office, working closely with the volunteer leadership of the NCA, is setting out to bring together all cathedral supporters and friends, all of them, under the revered banner of the NCA, using a common framework of giving tiers and corresponding benefits for donors across all constituencies. Longtime NCA members, yes, but new friends, new supporters, cathedral congregation members, others across the country. Thus, the NCA now truly becomes an association of all the friends of the Washington National Cathedral. But the mission is unchanged: to expand the national constituency of the cathedral and to act as ambassadors and advocates for the cathedral, to support the cathedral financially and otherwise, thereby contributing to repair and to preservation of the buildings, and to the instruments of the ministry, which are increasingly expensive. And finally, to constitute a national cathedral presence, but by designing and enhancing worship and program content for the cathedral's national constituency. You see, we want, and it's a figure of speech, to throw open the great west doors so the cathedral's voice can be heard away from Mount St. Albans, out beyond the Beltway, all the way across this nation and beyond. That is the serious work the NCA has ahead of it. Now, let me end on a personal note to all of you participating in this virtual town hall today. I have been nourished and inspired by this cathedral ever since I first became a 7-year-old choir boy, all those many years ago. To let the cat out of the bag was 1946. Over the years since then, I have loved and supported this cathedral, participated in a variety of volunteer activities, been involved in governance, attended countless meetings, but more importantly, countless services, concerts, and programs throughout the years. And I want you to know that the cathedral has been one of the major forces shaping my life and who I am. That is why I am deeply and personally grateful to each and every one of you for all you do for this great cathedral and for the difference you make. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, or good morning, or if I have some friends in Mother England, good evening, perhaps. Welcome to the cathedral, and welcome to our online friends, if you're watching us online. My name is Kevin Eckstom, and I am the Chief Communications Officer here at the cathedral. I'm fairly new. I've been here since June, and I got to tell you, I am having a really fun time. It's an amazing place to work. I was in journalism for 17 years as a reporter and as an editor, and I had always told myself that when the time came for me to do something else, that I wanted to go somewhere that actually was exciting, that was interesting, and that meant something. I didn't want to go work for the widget factory or General Mills or something like that. And so when this opportunity opened it up, I said, this is exactly where I want to be, and I think where I'm supposed to be. So it's great. I'm very happy to be here with you today and to talk about this place, this amazing place. And I'd like to start by introducing our very distinguished panel that has joined us today. I'm going to start on the far right, your left, and that's Ray Foote, who is a cathedral alum in many ways, former development director, a longtime member of the National Cathedral Association. And your day job now is Executive Vice President of the National Forest Federation. So welcome. Next is somebody who needs no introduction to pretty much anyone. Mr. Cathedral, Joe Alonso, who is our head stonemason and put that final finial up on the tower 25 years ago. There's lots of pictures of him doing that. Started here in 1985, and he's still here. And we're very, very grateful for that and to have you here this morning. Next, Bishop Eugene Sutton, also a cathedral alum in many ways. Now the Bishop of Maryland, just up the road in Baltimore. You former director of the
Cathedral Center for Prayer and Pilgrimage.
Cathedral Center for Prayer and Pilgrimage, one of our more popular destinations and turning 20 years old this year. So welcome back. Always happy to have you. And finally, Jan Smith, who is a member of the Cathedral Congregation, a longtime volunteer and activist around here, and member of the Outreach Committee. And your day job now is a freelance television journalist, correct? Okay. So we have cards placed around the room. If you have questions that you would like to have answered by our panel, feel free to write them down, pass them to the end of the aisle, and they'll collect them and bring them up here. And for our folks who are joining us online, we have a couple of ways for you to do that. You can go to our Facebook page, Facebook/WN Cathedral, or you can also tweet to us at our Twitter handle is @WN Cathedral as well, and you can use the hashtag Cathedral108 is what we're using for this event. So let's get started here, and I wanted to talk to you. I'm sorry, wrong hashtag. I'm a communications guy. I should know this. Hashtag WNC108 for our 108th birthday. So I'd like to throw this open to anyone on the panel who wants to tackle this one, but I'm curious what brought you to the cathedral in the first place? But more importantly, what keeps you involved? Why are you still here? Why do you keep coming back? Ray, you want to take that?
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. The first thing that brought me to the cathedral was the possibility of being a docent. I was a year or two out of college, and I thought that would be fascinating. And then I somehow got the notion that I had to wear a purple robe. And I quickly lost interest in being a docent. I found out later I only had to wear a purple cap or a purple tie or a purple tab. But it opened my eyes to the beauty of this place and the way that it changes lives and opens visitors' eyes. And what has kept me involved has been, I think, a growing understanding of the depth of experience people have and the depth of proclamation that this place emanates, and the people who come through it, the lives that come through it, and then go on to do something else. As John Shenefield said, we want to fling open the west end of this cathedral to the world, and that happens in many ways. Now, I know we'll talk about that some today. So I worked here for 7 years professionally, and now I'm involved as a volunteer. Happiest 7 years of my life, and many, many continuing entanglements that are a real joy to experience.
No, Jan, some of us are paid to be here every day, and that's great, Joe and I, but you're here pretty much every week on Sundays. So what is it that brought you here to the cathedral as a worshiper, but also keeps you coming back?
Well, first of all, it's like all of us, the grandeur. Here it is on top of this wonderful St. Albans Hill, and it's a beacon for the whole area. And it's wonderful to come in the doors and to see the diversity, which you don't see at a lot of churches on Sunday morning. Lots of times, Sunday morning is a time of division. Here at the cathedral, you see people from all walks of life and all colors and both genders. And the sermons here, I have to say, in front of two of the greatest sermonizers I've ever heard, Dean Hall and Jan Naylor Cope, wonderful sermons. I was first drawn by Dean Sam Lloyd and his wife, and then interim Dean Frank Wade, who I followed from St. Albans. And I think the sermons, the music, the great beauty, the stone, its strength, and it's inspiring.
Joe?
Well, I guess I could say a phone call brought me here. But as a stonemason working in D.C. before I came over here, the cathedral has always been sort of the ultimate level of stonemasonry and craftsmanship. All us masons knew about the cathedral. I worked with an old mason for a contractor before I came out here, and he was a little rough around the edges. And whenever something wasn't perfect, I'd say something to him. He said, "Oh, where do you think you are? The cathedral?" That was his. But my predecessor, Billy Cleland, one of the great stonemasons, the master stonemason that guided the construction of the cathedral for many, many years, called me to come work for him in 1985. That was when the crew was being augmented. They were hiring extra stone carvers, and they needed a couple of extra masons up on the towers laying stone. And I'd known Billy in the trade before here, and the phone rang one day, and he said, "Hey, Joe, I need another mason out here. Would you like to come out and work this season?" And I quit the guy I was working for the next day. We were working on the National Press Building, restoring that. And I said, "I'm going to the cathedral," and that was that.
It's a definite.
Well, as somebody who used to work in the press building every day, this is a much cooler place.
I agree. I worked there too. I totally agree. You graduated.
Now, Bishop, you used to work here, and
Yes.
but you keep coming back.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, I think they want to make sure I fulfill my pledge. I want to pick up on what Jan said earlier, the hospitality of this place. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I saw the cathedral on television, the great Christmas services. I said, "Man, that's a fabulous looking place, but I don't know if I will be welcome there." I was raised on the other side of Rock Creek Park in this city. And the cathedral represented for me everything that was big and official and rich and wealthy, all the things that we were not on the other side. I went on a Christmas Eve service here, and I was welcomed, a 17-year-old kid from the other side of the park. I was welcomed here. And I kept coming back a few times, and people would smile at me. And at communion, I could go up to the communion rail and receive communion, and no one asked any questions of me. And kneeling next to me could have been a United States senator or a Supreme Court justice or a head of one of these companies who also smiled, and we took communion together. And I tell you, especially at that time, in the late 60s, early 70s, this was about the only institution west of the park where I felt welcomed. This is a special place for me, and it always will be.
That's great. So just a reminder, if you have questions of our panel, we have the cards. And for our online friends, it's hashtag WNC108. You can send that to our Twitter account or Facebook, and we'll be happy to take your questions and put them here to the panel. So one of the, Joe, if you could talk a little bit, you were here 25 years ago with the last stone being put on the tower. One of the questions that we've already received is about where we are now in terms of the earthquake from 2011. And we've got, how much more do we have to do? And what does that involve? And somebody asked whether that final finial survived the earthquake.
Oh, well, first of all, the final finial did. It's in good shape. The West Towers actually suffered relatively little damage in the earthquake. So that's good. Our finial is still intact. As far as the work, earthquake repair, just quickly, you know, we just completed recently the phase 1 repairs, which was to get the interior put back together. It's beautiful now that the netting is gone. The ceiling, the cracks and the damage to the ceiling has been repaired. And we also cleaned the stonework and the stained glass windows. So it's just great to walk into the nave now and just see it in its grandeur again, which is so inspiring to so many people. And we also repaired 6 of the flying buttresses on the east end of the cathedral on the apse, which had suffered considerable damage in the quake. So those 2 were the first phase of repairs. Phase 2 is pretty much everything else you see on the exterior of the building. All the scaffolds that you see, that huge scaffold on top of the central tower, and any of the other exterior scaffolds are there now. You know, people would see a scaffold and think there's active work going on, but really those scaffolds were built to get us up there and remove the damaged stones, and they are now serving as stabilizing scaffolds for the work that's up there for the stones that have been damaged. So phase 2 is about $22 million yet to raise. I think we've raised close to $1 million of that, but still a long way to go for the second phase of work.
So I was wondering, and I'll open this up to anybody, you've all talked about how this is a beautiful building, but also more than just a building. That there's a spirituality here, that there's something special about this place. And I'm just sort of curious your thoughts as to how the fabric of this place, the grandeur, fits into our spiritual mission.
I'd be glad to answer, Kevin. That I think so often about the relationship between the beauty and the excellence, and what Joe was just describing, the care that was taken in repairing a problem back to a standard of excellence, that permeates what the National Cathedral is about. It comes through in the hard, tangible ways of stained glass and wrought iron and stone and the grounds, but it comes through in worship and programs. I came across a book when I worked here by a fellow named John Fitchin, and the book was The Construction of Gothic Cathedrals. Started reading it, but the way that book started just really caught me. He said, the primary challenge in all building is that of spanning space. And I thought about that. Well, and Joe could tell us more, but that's literally spanning space. How do you get from this post to that post to create an opening underneath that's protected from the weather and a structure that will stand up? But that idea of spanning space is really what this place is about. It's the space between races. It's the space between cultures. It's the space between ages and time and abilities and backgrounds and religions and doctrines. The cathedral spans that space every day, and it does it in some very prominent ways through major liturgies and feast days, and it does it in very small ways. The sort of welcome that Eugene mentioned, that someone who may be powerful and influential would smile at him, and he, as a 17-year-old, from the other side of the park would feel a connection. That is the sort of space spanning that this place does so well. And I think the architecture, we can take that as a metaphor for the beauty of life and a kingdom of God on earth, and that connection between humans.
Kevin, the cathedral is a national house of prayer for all people. And what does it mean to be a house of prayer for all people? It's the bottom line. I go to places in the last several years because of my duties in the church. I've gone almost all over the world. I visit museums, castles, all sorts of beautiful buildings, and they're dead. They're dead because there's no life in them. There's not a community of people that are gathered there. This cathedral, through its beauty, its fabric, its stone, its glass, it's really calling people to make meaning, to make connections. And this is, of course, the core of what we did at the Cathedral Center and what's happening at the Cathedral Center for all, the Cathedral Center for Prayer and Pilgrimage. But whether through the center or through the worship services or other things the cathedral does, it invites people to make deep connections between themselves and their God and with other people. And without that, it's just a museum. This cathedral will never be just a museum. It's calling everyone personally to make that connection through prayer. Maybe a last thing on that, I think about one of the pilgrimages that we did. We invited people to come here, and there was another teenager from Iowa who probably never saw anything above 4 floors in his community. He steps foot here and he just says, awesome. And I think especially in a society that many of us believe has become so crass, so banal, so empty of anything of deep meaning, for that kid to say, that touched something in him. This is an awesome place. And as you said earlier, Dean Hall, he found a way to pray. The building itself teaches people to pray. And that's something we need to protect.
But isn't there just a risk, Eugene? I mean, you say this place can never become a museum. I think there's the risk it could be, and I think that's something we and generations and legions of people have to guard against. It is a beautiful place, and it can touch people who come in the door, but if there is no community, there is no life, there is not that long-term commitment, that's why we need people involved. We need them as volunteers and preachers and donors. Right. So I fear that, I mean, I don't actively fear it, but it's imaginable that this place could become a shell without a strong, continued, communal, nationwide commitment. Do you agree?
Just a last line on that. If for any reason, God forbid, and we wondered on 9/11, on September 11, 2001, this was a tall structure. I tell you, all of us here, we wondered, is this going to be a target? Here's what I'm thinking. Even if the stones came crumbling down, people would still gather here because it's a prayer-infused space. It's a holy space, and we'll just build it again.
And after 9/11, people came here for healing. It was the center of healing, and it brought the nation together. And I think the cathedral does bring the nation together. Here in Washington, we're so divided right now. Republicans against Republicans. Look at Speaker Boehner just resigning. And Republicans against Democrats. And right now we're again in the midst of a presidential force race. But the cathedral brings people together. And like Dean Hall likes to talk about the pretty face of the cathedral, I think the core of the congregation is to be the muscle of mission outreach, to show the love of the cathedral, the compassion of the congregation for the community and the nationwide community, to show caring. And that without that muscle of mission, then it is the museum that you fear. But there is a strong muscular system at work here and a strong leadership.
So I'm wondering, Jen, if you could just talk a little bit about what it's like to be here week in and week out. A lot of people, they might come once in their life and they as a tourist or a visitor. There are other folks spread across the country in NCA and others who sort of are part of the cathedral from a distance. But I'm wondering, what is it about this place on a weekly, regular level that kind of speaks to you spiritually?
Well, first you come in and you are awed by the grandeur, and you get on your knees because you're thanking God. You feel his largeness, you feel his power, you feel his strength, and you feel like all of us are just little parts of the equation to do his will. And I've never heard a bad sermon here. Every sermon is very inspiring and gives you good nuggets to take home. And some of them are, we've had standing ovations on Father's Day and on Mother's Day for calls to do more, to be better parents and community members. I'm sometimes amazed that the pews aren't packed every single Sunday like Easter and Christmas Eve, because they should be. And that is my dream for the decades ahead, that more of the pews can be packed and then energize the mission outreach.
So we have a question, one of the questions from our audience. It's talking about the Cathedral College, which a lot of people know around here, but specifically the College of Church Musicians, which was part of it. And they produced a lot of fine musicians, a lot of great music over the years. And they're wondering, are there any plans to reinstate the program, or what are the plans for the college? Does anybody want to handle that?
Well, my wife is the director of music at St. Albans Parish, next door there from here. And so will someone tell her that I said that would be a great thing for this cathedral to do? And I know that musicians in the church are talking about where they might gather. And if not here, some other places they're talking about. Yeah, in all of these things, they're tough decisions to be made. This is why you have a dean and you have a chapter and all, so that they can make decisions that everybody gets angry at. And that is, you can't do everything. You can't do everything. And so it's always a challenge for an institution like this. What can we do versus what we can't do? If I may say one other thing that what Jan was talking about, I was thinking as you were talking, and Ray and Joe, what if there were no national cathedral? What if we did not exist? I think the nation would be impoverished. It was an Old Testament prophet, Isaiah, who prophesied in the 9th chapter, those who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. I think from Mount St. Alban, I like to think of it as just a beacon of light that radiates across the city and across the nation. You don't have to be here on Sunday morning. You just ought to be comforted knowing that in the nation's capital, there's a place of light that people can come to. And that light speaks to what St. Paul said, the light of the knowledge of the glory of God. And that light projects a Christianity, a Christian voice that's needed in this nation, that's compassionate, generous, intellectually honest, not in a war against science, ecumenically related, expansive, interfaith, all because it keeps its Christian core. Without that, this nation is impoverished. We need a national house of prayer for all people, and this is it.
The light metaphor certainly works in so many ways. I have a poignant memory of being up on a scaffold. Joe didn't want me to go up the scaffold, but he said it was okay. Dieter Goldkuhl was reinstalling one of the recently restored windows, and it was pretty high up there. And I went up with my camera, and I wanted to see how this happened. And I discovered in this craftsman with this thick German accent who was laboring away at this place as he had been for, what, Joe, 40 years.
Yeah.
I asked him a couple of simple questions. What is it like to be up here and doing this all day? And he pointed at the window he was installing, and he said, to me, working on this place is holy. He said, I work with windows and glass. And he said, for me, everything is about light. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. And you feel that when you walk in this place, and you feel it when you talk with people. I had the great fortune of traveling all over the country for the National Cathedral Association. Everyone has a cathedral story. Everyone who's been here has a cathedral story. And so many of them reflect on how when you walk in, the majesty and the magic of the light, and the sound is even different. But we think a lot about light, and I like Eugene's idea about this is a place of hope and inspiration and brightness extending out in all directions. The other hill in Washington, D.C.
Well, and what's interesting, speaking of light, if we just want to run with this metaphor for a little bit, this week the Pope was in town, And the Pope has had a lot to say about caring for creation and the environment. And so the cathedral tried to piggyback on that a little bit this week. And we had hundreds of people here on Thursday night to talk about ways that we could rally around the Pope's message of saving the earth. And we talked about ways that the cathedral could be a part of that in ways that we could lead. And there are lots of people out there looking to this cathedral for what we're doing so that they can take it home and replicate it on their own. So at the end of the event, we had a table set up with light bulbs, energy-efficient light bulbs. The cathedral has recently installed 1,500 energy-efficient light bulbs. And that's only a drop in the bucket for if you think about how many light bulbs are around this place. But people were coming up and writing us checks, giving us credit cards, putting cash in the box because they want to help us finish this job. And they feel like they own a little piece of this place now. But people are really looking to us to find out what we're doing and what they can take home with them. So it's really kind of interesting. Joe, this question is for you. This came in before the event, but after being affiliated with the cathedral for so long, and you've been affiliated with us for a long time, why are you still passionate about this place, particularly about the building, and how do you keep that passion going?
Oh, it's not hard to keep it going. I mean, you walk in here every day, and again, as a craftsman, as a mason, whatever, I'm very aware of the generations of craftsmen who worked on this building before us, and you see their work all over. I look at stones, I look at something, the way something is cut, or, assembled, and I think, wow, that's back in Bethlehem Chapel 100 years ago. And it's I think of all the craftsmen and masons who were here before me building this place. I was thinking of that 25 years ago, the day we were setting the final stone, as I was up there with Canon Feller and Otto Epps. Otto was another long-time worker here at the cathedral, and Otto was up on that scaffold with us. And as that stone was coming in on the crane, I just really did think of the hundreds of masons and stone carvers and artisans who worked here, and how many of them didn't get a chance to see this moment because they were gone before they spent their entire lives working here and didn't see it built. But I felt the ghosts of those hundreds or thousands of people that worked on this cathedral that day as we were maneuvering the final stone in. So again, I come here every day, and I know my colleagues, Andy and Sean, who work with me, this has been handed to us to maintain, to work on, and we've got to do the best we can while we're here to pass it on to the next crew. And that's speaking as a builder and a person that restores this building, but I think you could say it about anyone, whether you're a priest or congregation, anyone. Here we've got it now, it's ours, and do the best we can with it, because we've got to maintain it to pass over to the next crew.
And you're still carving. I mean, there's a bust of Jonathan Daniels that's about to be commemorated on October 11th. A civil rights activist who was killed in 1965. He stood in front of a young 17-year-old black woman and took the bullet for her and helped turn the tide in the whole civil rights movement. And his bust has just been carved in the human rights porch.
Right, yeah. My colleague Sean Callahan, a very talented stone carver, Sean just finished that, and it's amazing. Yeah, none of us, I had never heard of Jonathan Myrick Daniel, and it's just great that, yeah, there you've got Mother Teresa, Rosa Parks, everyone knows who they are, and now Jonathan Myrick Daniels. That's a great story and a worthy individual to put there, and that's what's amazing about this place, that we're still doing these sorts of things and commemorating these people, and it now will tell his story for generations.
I think we see too in situations like that bust being carved, or the statue of Rosa Parks, or different events that are held here, a real connection between our civil and our ecclesiastical life, or our life of our nation, life in our nation's capital, and our faith lives. And we all know the National Cathedral is the site of major events that are of national importance. I think of the Reagan funeral in 2004, I believe it was, and the extraordinary preparation that went into that. Some of my staff at the time were kind of dragooned the day before to stand in as family members in the hearse and the motorcade that pulled up as part of the rehearsal. And I remember one young woman on the development staff running into my office and said, "I was Nancy Reagan today." Well, unfortunately, she was going to her husband's funeral. But events like that, I think, are an important part of the identity of this place, that we carve statues and install windows and hold liturgies and services and lectures about things that are important in our national life and events that mean something. And the cathedral and its staff and its volunteers always bring a spiritual dimension into that and host those kinds of discussions and services in a spiritual context.
We are just about out of time, but I'm going to, Bishop Eugene, you're going to get the last question because you're the resident preacher up here. But before we...
Jan finally gets to hear a bad sermon.
Before we wrap this up, I just wanted to thank our panelists, to Ray and Joe and Bishop Eugene and Jan. Really, really interesting discussion and a real reminder of why we're here, whether it's every day, whether we're online, or on Sundays. This really is a special place. But Bishop Eugene, I was wondering if you could answer our last question from the audience. It talks about how do you address the challenge of this Christian institution being a house of prayer for all people, but also a distinctly Christian institution at the same time?
What a great place to be. That's the stance we want, because everybody has convictions, and you have to stay true to your convictions at the core. But if you can be strong at the core, that means you can be generous on the edges. You can welcome all people when you have a sure foundation and you're not threatened by being changed by the other. So to me, being interfaith, ecumenical, and Christian, that's where I want to be. I think that's where Jesus was and where Jesus would be. Joe, I've loved Joe for a long time, and you could say the final stone, the last stone. I always think there are really three stones. There's the last stone that Joe put up, and that's the fabric of this place. Then there's the first stone, and that's Christ himself, the cornerstone of this cathedral, the cornerstone of our faith. And then there's us. What stone do you bring? When Jesus said to one of his closest disciples, "I'm going to rename you. Simon, you're Peter," Petros in Greek for rock. "And on this rock I will build my church." And I think that's how this cathedral is going to be built and stay built. It's the rock, the rubble sometimes, of the faith of so many millions of people who say, we need this place to stand. This cathedral is in my will. I have a lot of commitments. I have a diocese that's not this diocese, and they're in my will also. And our kids know that the church is in our will. And I give money to this cathedral every year. I've got hundreds of churches to support and all that, but it's important for me to contribute to this place. And no matter where you are in this country, whether you're in Wisconsin, Texas, New Mexico, what do I have to do with the cathedral? Help build it. It's the little rubble in the rock of so many thousands of us that's going to make this stone place the living stone that it needs to be. So if I had any encouragement, remember this place in your will. Give a little bit of it. You have your own communities and your own commitments, but make some space. Make some space in your giving and in your prayers for this house of prayer for all people.
That was great.
Well, so much for that bad sermon part. So on behalf of all of us here at the Cathedral, I'd like to thank you for joining us today, whether here in the room or out there online. You just remember you can always find us on Facebook and on Twitter at WN Cathedral. And we look forward to hearing from you, from working with you, and being a part of your lives as much as you are a part of ours. So thank you very much.
Thank you.